and welcome back to another episode of Access Vikings. I'm Emily Leiker. I'm joined as always by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleagues, Andrew Krammer and Ben Goessling. And guys, it wasn't quite football, but we got the most football look we've gotten in months yesterday out at TCO Performance Center in Eagan. The Vikings are about a little over a week into their off-season program. And Andrew, you and I were there when we got to go up and watch JJ McCarthy throwing for the first time since last fall, see some of the other new faces. We think we caught a glimpse of Ryan Kelly. We weren't entirely sure. It looked like him when he turned around, but we didn't see him up close. So let's just start there, Andrew, with kind of what we saw in those 15 minutes that we got to kind of watch just the offensive guys yesterday going through stuff at the start of workouts.
Yeah, if you're on YouTube, you can see I'm doing this arm motion thing. He was doing that. He was throwing the football. He was doing all the kind of stuff that fans want to see. He was looking, as he said to all of us at the press conference, like he's 215 pounds, or back up to that weight that had everybody so concerned. To me, it was more revelatory because, we only got 10, 15 minutes to kind of see him chuck a ball around. Coaches are not allowed. What I love about the NFLPA's rules about the offseason right now is coaches are not allowed on the field with these guys. It's just strength and training staff. And then there's an additional line that I hadn't seen on the NFLPA before where it says defenders cannot catch a football no matter who it's thrown by. I was like, what? Like, okay, you can't even play toss anymore in phase one of these offseason workouts. So it's very, very early in the process, but JJ's out there. Kevin O'Connell's told us all that he's got no limitations. He's through his rehab right now. Ben, what stood out to you about what he had to say? Because obviously there was just a litany of questions we had for this guy who we hadn't heard from since 200 plus days.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, a lot of what he said was pretty confident in what he can do in his first year as a starter. I mean, he said, I know I'm ready to start. And he said a lot of that is preparation. A lot of that is kind of, I think, his belief in himself. And he got quite a bit into, as he typically does in the times that we get to talk to him, about kind of his own journey, his own kind of mental process to this point, and, learning how to kind of be present in the moment. And he talked about, so I think he just came out with this a few weeks ago that he's been diagnosed with ADHD. So he's learned a lot about what it's meant to live with ADHD. I don't know when he got diagnosed with that, but I think he said that, probably around the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, that he has been living with ADHD. So one of the things he talked about is that people with ADHD, I think as he put it, find calm in the chaos and chaos in the calm. And this idea of how are you going to handle the scrutiny of being a starting quarterback in the NFL and being a guy that is starting for a 14-win team that people have expectations for. He basically said, look, I started at Michigan with 110,000 people in the stands every week. I won a national championship. I've done this before. And we've all talked about that, but I didn't know the part about ADHD and how he actually feels like that helps him focus and helps him be calm and sort of relishing the moment when things are flying around him. So it was interesting to hear some of that. I thought that was pretty thoughtful and pretty unique to hear how that has worked for him and how living with that has actually in some ways helped him as a quarterback. But, a lot of things like that and a lot of things that you kind of get from JJ McCarthy. So it was interesting to hear kind of where his mind is at. He talked a little bit about Aaron Rodgers and how he handled all of that speculation and just kind of what he does to come in and be a leader. We heard a lot from players too about his leadership. So just a lot of interesting kind of snapshots of where things are at with JJ McCarthy. As QB1, by all accounts, he is QB1. They haven't said it, but I don't know that they really need to. Everybody kind of knows that's going to be the way they go.
Yeah, regarding Rodgers, I think his quote was something along the lines of, I put the blinders on just like I always have my whole career. So he was clearly not fazed by any of that. Also, we should mention the gratitude journal because it came up, 4 times yesterday as he was talking. But that's obviously, we've heard a lot about his meditation practice, both from his time at Michigan and then into the Vikings. I'm sure he talked about that with you guys last fall when he got here, but said the gratitude journal is something that he's picked back up since college. He let go of it for a couple of years. I'll say the gratitude journal is very trendy with the Gen Zs right now. So I was not surprised to hear him say that. That is definitely a trend with the 20 somethings, the gratitude journal. So I want to know what it looks like. What type of journal? Like a moleskin? Is he typing it out? I'm sure he's writing it. That feels very JJ to handwrite the gratitude journal.
This might be dangerous and I might be putting words in his mouth, but I wonder if what is written down is there. I'm grateful Aaron Rodgers is going to be a Steeler. We don't know that,
things, didn't he? I mean, did he start talking about like the ability to see? I mean,
yeah,
yes, he did say,
I'm healthy. I have all my faculties. I have all my senses. I mean, stuff that we take for granted. I think he got into some of those things.
Yeah, he mentioned kind of filling it out during his rehab. So I imagine it's just things, as simple as walking, as simple as getting up and being able to go to your fridge or whatever.
Yeah.
Do workouts at home, things that he just couldn't obviously do all the time.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that, to start, he came out and said, like, I feel 110%, but I don't remember if it was later in that answer or just later on when he was talking that he was like, I actually feel better than I did last year when I came into this and was even like coming out of college or whatever he phrased it as. Just like, I do think, like, as much as sitting out for a year sucks for him and was disappointing to fans, like, I do truly think there's going to be a much better JJ product this fall than there would have been if he was playing last year. I don't know how much either of you agrees with that or what you think about that sentiment, but I think sitting out for a year is really going to have benefited him in a way that putting him in to immediate action wouldn't have necessarily.
Yeah. What do you think of that, Ben?
Well, a lot of what we heard the Vikings say last year was how they wanted to, these are my words, not theirs, but manicure the process. They wanted to have it be on their timeline when they felt he was ready, not something that was forced by anything external. That's been a lot of the reason they brought in Sam Darnold. I think it's a lot of the reason they have looked for other quarterbacks with starting experience, which Sam Howell has in the NFL, because they didn't want to be in this situation. We've talked about this, but where they have to say, well, we're not sure, but he's the best we got, so let's just hope for the best. That goes back to, for Kevin O'Connell, Dwayne Haskins in Washington, where that timeline got sped up, I think in part because ownership wanted to see him on the field, and that didn't work out well for anybody. So a lot of what they have tried to do is say, let's not rush this thing. They have stated before that they think it's best when quarterbacks get a chance to sit. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean for 3 years like Jordan Love did, especially when you want that cheap quarterback contract. But I was talking with an NFL coach about this the other day with another team, and we got talking about the quarterback situation in general, and just so many times where these guys get drafted, they go in, they play a position that you're really probably better at when you're in your 30s because you've seen it all. But everybody wants these quarterbacks to play because the contract is cheap and you can pay everybody else. And everybody's just excited to see that player. So you are trying to walk a lot of that line. And I think what they have hoped to do is give him time to learn what it means to play this position in the NFL as compared to what it was in college. And I don't think was the way that they would have wanted to do it. Certainly you didn't want to have him miss the practice time and spend all of the time rehabbing. But the sheer fact that he had that much time to sit and learn and ask questions and study and, be in an NFL building without having the pressure on him yet, I don't think is a bad thing. So we'll see what that means for his first year on the field. But I think a lot of what serendipitously happened from this is kind of what they hoped would happen anyway. So, there's not a lot of downside to it from that perspective if he's able to take it and do something with it this fall.
Yeah, Ben, you said it, that the only downside is he wasn't practicing. He wasn't going through the footwork. He had to do a lot of the, whether it's the VR stuff or doing the game planning stuff. JJ did say yesterday, told us that it was nice to do all the game planning stuff, the weekly meetings with O'Connell in a stress-free environment, knowing that, everything's not hinging on me going into an individual week. But the ideal scenario would have been he sat the entire year healthy behind Sam Darnold, did all the things at practice with Sam Darnold, and had that kind of bank, that physical kind of bank to build on in terms of muscle memory and all the things you need at that position to go along with the mental stress of the position too, obviously. So he's going to be starting not from square one, certainly, but it felt like one of the PJ Fleck year zero kind of moments for him where, he got a little bit of a taste of it, but this is going to be truthfully his most work with Justin Jefferson whenever he gets year. He said he's looking forward to when that is for the voluntary stuff in the offseason. Those are going to be the critical moments and the things that they could have benefited from last year had he gotten that work with Jalen Naylor and whoever was in the second team, Trent Sherfield and all that. But they obviously did not get that last year.
Yeah, well, and Andrew, you and I didn't talk about this a ton when we did our post-draft wrap-up, and we're talking about Sam Howell. But one of the things that stuck out to me that General Manager Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah said the other day was he was talking about Howell, but I think it really speaks to how him and Kevin have approached their quarterbacks the entire time they've been here, from what I know at least, is he said, we say a lot that organizations fail quarterbacks long before quarterbacks fail organizations. And it feels like they're kind of one of the few front offices that feel that way in the league. Like, you could probably count on one hand how many teams feel that strongly about themselves having more responsibility over a quarterback's success than the quarterback. I mean, just think of some of the situations we've seen in recent years. Like, I think Daniel Jones comes to mind as a big one, and obviously the Vikings bring him in. So I think you saw that right with Sam Darnold and bringing him in, a guy who was definitely failed by some of the teams he played for before, but does have a level of talent that clearly the Vikings saw last year. You see that in the way they've treated McCarthy's rehab, and you see that in them bringing in Sam Howell, who has 22, 23 interceptions on his 3-season stat line, most of them all in that one season he started, but does have 17 plus games of starting experience as a 24-year-old quarterback, which is not something that most teams boast or most young quarterbacks boast.
Yeah, I mean, in that season, he threw for, I think, close to 4,000 yards with Washington, and that was not a good team. That was not a great situation around him. But, talking to people that have worked with him a little bit, there's no doubt about the arm talent. There's no doubt about, how he fits in a locker room. And people speak very highly of how he'll go into that room and how he'll be not somebody that's looking to kind of undermine JJ McCarthy. I mean, I think there's a lot of work that's been done in that regard as well to say, how is this going to work between the two of them? And, the sense I get is that there's not going to be an issue there. I think that's one of the reasons they feel good about it. But he can move. He's got a deep, an arm that can push the ball downfield. The intermediate throws have been the issue, but a lot of people kind of talk about this in terms of that's just learning timing and footwork in the NFL to be able to hit those things. And if he's already been bounced around to a few different offenses, a few different coaching staffs. So, the reality is when you are starting over as much as he's done, that's where you see it suffer, is you don't have that timing, as a secondary kind of thing. It's not banked in your muscle memory because you haven't had the time to get to that point. So when you're late on a route or on a throw, then things get behind and then balls get tipped, balls get intercepted. I mean, you see things like that happen all the time with young quarterbacks, or you're just taking that extra hitch to process what you're seeing, and then things get thrown off because of all of that. So I think some of those things they will certainly drill and certainly work on footwork and what they want to see from their quarterbacks, but it's not that different of a conversation than we've heard them have with JJ McCarthy. So I think a lot of the work they will be doing with these two is kind of on a similar track, which may not be a bad thing for Sam Howell if you're kind of able to have a process that benefits both of these guys from a teaching standpoint.
Yeah, and like Sam Darnold, Sam Howell sat basically for an entire year in a different spot, a year removed from when he last started. It wasn't quite like San Francisco and the similarities of the Vikings offense, but I remember Darnold talking a lot about how that year off kind of helped him and helped him kind of recalibrate, use that starting experience, but apply it to what he was learning in a new spot. So not to say Howell's going to even start or play anywhere near like what Sam Darnold did last year, but it gives them at least an option. I use the phrase meat shield quite a bit because that's what they kind of need for JJ McCarthy. They need a guy in front of them just in case Kevin O'Connell, who's been very vocal about wanting to be hesitant about, as Ben said, about throwing the rookie out there to the Wolves. This gives them at least an option in case JJ shows for whatever reason in Kevin O'Connell's mind that he's not quite ready come week one.
I like the fact that we could go with contingency, we could go with backup plan, we could go with safety net, but you've used the phrase meat shield.
Yeah, that's what it is. And when you see defensive linemen hit these quarterbacks, that's what I'm thinking of. Like, well, we're Sam Darnold taking all those hits last year. Of like that wasn't JJ.
Yeah, there's any number of ways we could go, but we at the Star Tribune have planted our flag behind the phrase "meat shield." So we're gonna go with it. I like it. Let's ride with it.
I think it's fitting too, because like zombie media is kind of making a comeback, and like meat shields feels like very zombie-esque to me. Bringing quarterbacks back to life in the Vikings facility and turning them into meat shields for
the only thing I don't
pure QB.
The only thing I don't think we'll do is get it past editors to get it into print for the Star Tribune. I don't think
we're not here right now. We can say it.
Right.
They can't stop us.
We'll do a little bet and who can get meat shield into their story first.
That's not a bad idea. We've done that a couple times where we see if we can sneak something in, but that's a good idea. If KB is not editing at night, we may have a better chance. KB, if you're listening, just let us
ignore it.
Yeah.
We should be hearing and seeing JJ McCarthy a lot more, so I don't feel like we need to spend too much more time on him today. But is there anything else that we feel like is worth mentioning from what we heard from him or saw from him yesterday? I think we did a good job covering most of the bases.
The only thing it might dovetail with what we talk about later, but just what we heard from Grenard and O'Neill and Metellus about believing in, and Ben, you wrote about this too, and just the faith that a 14-win team is putting in a very young kid is worth talking about. But I'm sure we'll get into the T-shirts and stuff later too as well.
Yeah, I mean, but briefly on that point, I mean, Jonathan Grenard talked about it a little bit yesterday, and this is a little bit of a throwback to Brian O'Neill talking about the things that he did not get at the end of the previous administration. But Grenard said, a lot of people will walk in and say, "Hey, how you doing?" It's kind of a throwaway phrase, and he said he actually wants to know. So you can kind of roll your eyes at that and say this is typical Vikings culture, collaboration kind of stuff. But I think some of that for JJ McCarthy has been, I'm going to build relationships with these players if I'm going to be talked about as a leader and going to be counted on to lead this team at 22 years old, which is full of a lot of veterans. So I think there is an element of that, of building trust and building some level of gravitas and some level of, just cachet with them, I think, to have people say, yeah, we can follow this guy, even if he's in some cases 8 to 10 years younger than we are. So a lot of that, I think, is probably him. I think he just generally is pretty effervescent is the word I used in the paper today, just kind of very bubbly and kind of excitable a lot of the time and conversational a lot of the time. But I think there also is a strategic element of that in terms of getting people to rally to your cause that he is, I think, using to his benefit there as well.
I mean, how many local media members did he call by name yesterday as he was asked questions?
Oh, yeah.
Like that's another sign of that. You can see that personality shining through. We'll wrap the JJ conversation there for today. You mentioned veterans. One of them got a contract extension yesterday. We were in the facility and we noticed that his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, was down sitting in the lobby of TCO, presumably waiting to go up to sign this deal, finalize this deal. Andrew Van Ginkel, outside linebacker, who arrived last year during free agency, formerly with the Dolphins while Brian Flores was there. Vikings added him, and 11.5 sacks last year behind only Jonathan Grenard for the Vikings. He gets a contract extension. Just how big is this, I guess, for the Vikings defense, but particularly that edge rushing unit that really felt like it popped off the page last year?
Rock Valley's got to be ecstatic, right, Ben?
Yeah, as Paul Allen said in the first broadcast of the year, Rock Valley, Iowa, go crazy. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. That money will go a long way. I think, I think he spends a lot of time back home, but he'll be able to throw some nice parties in Rock Valley with some of that. But, yeah, he's a guy that it's interesting because nobody thought that he was going to be a second team All-Pro. I don't think. I mean, that was not in the cards. And the deal they signed him to, I mean, they can talk about, we saw he was going to be able to be, this or that. And he was scheduled to make $10.78 million this year, which is a nice number, but he wasn't in a position where he was going to get this kind of a deal a year ago. In fact, the Vikings wanted to sign him in 2023. I remember talking to Brian Flores about that last year. Flores said, I wanted him here the first year because he became one of those sneaky pieces for Flores in Miami that, you know, it's a 5th round pick that people didn't think that much of because he was a wirier edge rusher and, you know, just not a guy that gets a lot of attention. And he played a big role in those defenses. So that's part of the reason Flores wanted him, but he signed a 1-year deal to stay with the Dolphins. And the initial 2-year deal here was again a nice deal for him. I think it was a $7 million signing bonus, but it's not break the bank type money. So to go from that to getting the deal he got, I think just sort of tells you he, you know, punched above his weight, I think, in a lot of ways last year, or at least punched above his reputational weight, I should say. So they get this done. I would be stunned if this does not lower his cap number from 12.4 million this year. He had 4 void years in the initial deal, and you end up moving 1.4 of the void money off of 2026 already. And my guess is there is enough wrapped up in a signing bonus here that a lot of that money will get pushed into 27, 28, 29 in those remaining void years in the contract. Maybe they even added one more. I haven't seen the full details of it yet, but this made sense because of the ways that they can manipulate that cap number while rewarding a guy that had the year that he had. I remember kind of pointing out the possibility earlier this offseason that Van Ginkel could be an extension candidate. I had a few people ask me, you really think so with Dallas Turner, you know, kind of coming up the way he is? I said, yeah, I do, because it's not something that precludes Dallas Turner from playing a bigger role, and it also gives the Vikings a little more flexibility down the road. And yes, they are pushing money a little bit further into the future, but the fact that he had this many void years already, I do think will mitigate a lot of this, and also will probably give them more money to roll into 2026 because his cap number will go down this year. So maybe they'll use some of that on some other things. I think that's still possible, but I think this was kind of a win-win for the Vikings and the cap numbers that they wanted to be able to maneuver, and for Andrew Van Ginkel to get rewarded for the year that he had and what he's meant to this defense in a fairly short time here.
Yeah, an incredible year that he had too, coming off foot injury that really wasn't detailed until he made the Pro Bowl last year. And he talked about how it was a Liz Frank injury that he was working his way back from, and obviously the flooding in his hometown, Ben, that you chronicled back.
He spent the entire summer working flood relief while recovering from a Liz Frank injury.
Yeah. And then it comes back and obviously is a little slow to get on the field right away in the summer, but then just is obviously everything that Flores remembered and everything that they needed at that spot, especially when Dallas Turner had showed that he was not ready to seize any kind of a meaningful role. Yeah. And there's already, with Van Ginkel, to your point, with him in the fold, there's already going to be room for Dallas to take a next step because Pat Jones, the number 3 edge rusher, has moved on in free agency. So there's still room for Dallas Turner to grow, but it wouldn't be like this Vikings front office to let a guy like that just kind of walk out the door. You see what happened with Byron Murphy, somebody that they had no real previous knowledge of, comes in here, earns a new deal, and they say, you know what, we're going to pay you top of market value for what you did. And so they will always pay their own, reward their own. And Van Ginkel's nowhere near the age that they're going to, think about letting him walk out the door. So that's a nice deal for him too. That's not far off from, it's reportedly, we'll see what the real guarantees are and all that. But if he earns that $23 million, and that's up there with what Danielle Hunter signed a year ago, it's really good money for him. Yeah, for sure. It is. He is an interesting story because I think initially, lightly recruited out of Rock Valley, a guy that he played quarterback in high school. I went down and watched film of him with his old high school coach when I went down to do that story last year. That town is awfully small. It's in Northwest Iowa. Grew up a Vikings fan. Didn't have much attention. Ends up going to Wisconsin and does well enough to get drafted, but not somebody that anybody expected to do what he's done. And the work that he's put in has gotten him to this point. And I just think about going back to last summer. He's working sun up to sundown. He had flooding into, I think, the main level of his house. Basically flooded his entire basement, destroyed a lot of memorabilia. So he helped clean up his own house, obviously, and then it was basically, okay,
this is what we do around here. I'm going to get out and push a wheelbarrow and go help people tear things out of their basements, move fridges that got destroyed, just heavy labor that you had to take care of because there wasn't going to be enough outside help to get everything cleaned up in the time that they needed to do it. So, I mean, everybody in that town, it was the entire summer. I mean, the teachers that went in and gave up their summer vacations to say, we need this school ready to go in relatively short order. I mean, there was kind of this town pick itself up mentality of just, you see this a lot of times when disaster strikes, people jump in and help each other out. And I remember talking to his old high school principal, and she said, yeah, we just see him walking down the street with a wheelbarrow or a trailer pulling behind a truck to get things out of there. And it's like, don't you have things to do to get ready for an NFL season? He's like, yeah, but I need to do this. So he basically would do that and then go lift, I think, in the high school weight room at night. So to do that all summer and to come back off that injury to have the year he had is a pretty rare set of circumstances that he handled awfully impressively.
We should note too that Drew Rosenhaus is also the agent for safety Josh Metellus, who we at first maybe thought he was there to negotiate a contract extension for.
He maybe was.
A contract year. Yes, he could.
Business.
Yeah, there could have been multiple stops. He also represents Aaron Jones, who obviously did get a new deal done earlier this year in free agency. So a lot of reasons for Drew Rosenhaus to be around TCO yesterday. And we got one of them with Van Ginkel. We'll see what happens with Josh Metellus. Ben, you asked him about the contract and how those talks were going, and he didn't really want to get into it, but he basically uttered the same line that Aaron Jones did way back in late December when he was like, I want to be a Viking for the rest of my career. So I think there's willingness there on his side and a want there, and it just kind of depends on how things shake out on the other end. So
yeah, and a couple things on that front. I mean, they did redo his deal last year. The only thing they did to it, it was totally procedural. They added a couple of void years to the deal, I believe. Maybe it was just one void year, but they didn't add any money to that deal. So essentially what they were doing when that happened, when they signed him to that initial contract, and I had totally forgotten this until he said it yesterday, that he actually got cut early in his time with the Vikings and then comes back and obviously plays a much larger role for Brian Flores than he had for Mike Zimmer. But when he signed that contract extension, he 100% has outplayed it, because I don't think I've ever seen a guy hit incentives the way that he has. You can very clearly see they were not planning for him to hit. I mean, playing time stuff that it's like, if you go 90%, you're going to get a couple $1 million from between incentives and base escalators. I've watched contracts with the Vikings pretty closely for a long time. I don't think I've seen somebody outplay everything in this the way that he did, because teams write these things to reward players, but they also tend to put the incentives just out of reach. And there's cap reasons for that I won't bore people with a ton. But if you want to look it up, it's the difference between not likely to be earned and likely to be earned incentives in terms of when they count on the cap. But the upshot is teams don't expect players to do what Josh Metellus did and realize all of these things. So when he is doing that, it makes all the sense in the world that they would say, let's just pay you in a way that we know what the number is going to be and there aren't surprises. We can manage it. We can budget for it. So when they did that void year last year, part of it was you can't get a raise twice in less than one calendar year. And I think he signed that deal initially in September of 23. So they couldn't do something right away last offseason. But when they did that void year, it was like, okay, this is a placeholder for another deal. So he didn't say anything about it yesterday, but the way they have operated and the way that deal is constructed, I think he is very much an extension candidate. He's somebody that plays an instrumental role in their defense. He's still only 27 years old. I think there's very much reason to think an extension happens with him at a number that they can probably still manage, because he's a free agent after this year. They've got the void years there. He's a guy they'll want to keep. I think it makes a lot of sense that something would get done before the start of the 2025 regular season.
Yeah, he's a really interesting case because of all the positions that he plays. I do think that Cam Bynum and what he got from the Colts, $15 million a year, complicates things a little bit because Cam Bynum is not as versatile of a guy as Josh Metellus, and he got really paid. And so I imagine Josh is saying, "Hey, happy for Cam, love Cam, one of my best friends, but I need to top that. I'm playing."
Especially happy for Cam because of what it means for me.
Yeah, exactly. And when I sat down with Josh in the middle of last season for a story on him, he talked about how when he did that contract extension before the Tampa Bay game at the start of the 2023 season, he talked about how the comps that Drew Rosenhaus pulled in terms of contracts that they were presenting the Vikings in terms of this is what our next deal needs to look like was all top special teamers. Everything they were pulling is just what do the top special teamers make? Because that's just all he thought he was going to be. And when Josh says that he wasn't expecting to play as much as he has the last 2 years, I believe him based on everything that we heard about that, because they clearly thought he was just going to be a top special teamer for them, a number 3, number 4 safety. At the time, I think Lewis Seen was still in the picture. He was still on the team. Not to say that they totally thought he was going to grow into anything, but he was at least an option for them. And then obviously Theo Jackson, after the Seen injury in 2022, had come in as well. So they had a lot of options at safety. And I think he's just grown and ascended everyone's expectations so much that it really puts them in a bind with these contract talks, because Josh probably wants to get paid like maybe not a top 5 safety, but why not top 10 if Cam Bynum is sniffing in that area as well? So do they pay him that much? How much do they really, really like him? I think that is an interesting question because he's as versatile, he's as smart as they want. But we know he was a 6th round pick for a reason. He's a fairly limited athlete for that position. He's not the athlete Lewis Seen was even before that injury. So I do wonder what they're going to do. And I guess it's not a shock to me that this is kind of taking a minute, at least longer than Van Ginkel's, because it just seems a more complicated negotiation.
Yeah, it's like, what's the comparison too? I mean, do you compare him to a Cam Bynum when he's kind of playing a different position? Do you compare him to more of an inside linebacker? I don't know that he would want that either, because the stats are not going to be quite the same, but he's such a unique piece and probably a role that is unique to them. I don't know that he would be asked to do exactly the same things in many other defenses. So it is tricky, because where do you base his comps off of as you're trying to build a contract? And, who should he make more than, or who should he make slightly less than? That's how a lot of these things go. And it's hard to find parallels for him. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that's part of the reason this one is a little tougher to figure out. The safety position for them in general, we haven't talked about it a lot, but it is pretty interesting to see where this will go. They didn't draft one, and I obviously mocked Malachi Starks in my 7-rounder that I did, because I thought they could take somebody here, given the fact that Harrison Smith's in year 14, given the fact that Metellus is a free agent after this year, and they lost Cam Bynum. They like Theo Jackson. Obviously, Lewis Seen didn't work out, but there are still a lot of pieces in flux at that position, which Brian Flores likes to use a lot. He uses 3 safeties a lot. So there's a lot for them to figure out in terms of the future of the safety spot. And this is certainly a big piece of that for them.
They only added.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add real fast. They only signed one undrafted free agent safety too. So it's not like they did legwork there to bring in more guys. Go ahead, Andrew.
And Metellus had just mentioned that he said, all I can do is go out and play the 1,000 snaps I played last year for you. And that, look,
a little bit of a message, didn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of he's being nice. He's winning the press conference, but he's also saying, hey, I play more than anybody for you. I'm still playing all the special team stuff. I'm playing every defensive snap. Pay me.
Yeah, that did not feel like an accident that he included that particular statistic in his response to my question.
Obviously, we've been talking a lot about Metellus's comments. He was one of 4 players that did talk yesterday for quite a long time. And there was great content that was non-football content in there. Obviously, a lot of the football content was great as well. But we got to talk to Jonathan Grenard, Brian O'Neill, JJ McCarthy, and then Josh Metellus. Andrew, let's just start, and we can kind of each go through and discuss these things. But what was your favorite little tidbit, anecdote, whatever that we heard, football or not football?
Well, we were talking about this before the podcast, but to me, it was when Brian O'Neill mentioned a dinner with Donovan Jackson, and he was talking about going out with them, and then just talking about how Donovan had to make that transition that we all talked so much about at Ohio State, where he plays left tackle. The Vikings view that as a good thing, not a bad thing for him. But Brian's like, better him than me, because there was a time back in 2020 where we didn't know if Riley Reif was going to be here. And that kind of brought Ben and I down memory lane, where they pinched Riley Reif in a contract restructure because they needed a defensive end because Danielle Hunter got hurt. And they were going to go out and get Ngakoue from Jacksonville. Yeah, Jacksonville. And Brian was just saying, they put me at left tackle for a few practices. I remember we were all out there watching these practices, and we didn't know that was what was currently going in Brian's head, as he just shared with us yesterday, was, what are you guys doing? This is going to fail. This is not going to be good for anybody. And so Brian was saying, basically, to credit Donovan, it's a heck of a move that he had made in college to do that against Abdul Carter in his first start, and to do it through a national title run for the Buckeyes. But just that little window into a third-year Brian O'Neill being asked to move to left tackle, and him being like, this is insane. We should not do this. I'm sure that happens with athletes way more often than we ever get that kind of insight to learn about.
Well, it is really interesting because we ask this question all the time. There's inevitably somebody that gets asked to play right guard instead of left guard, or left guard instead of right guard. I mean, this happens all the time. And we ask the question all the time, is it that different? And some players kind of downplay and say, no, it's not really that different. Some are like, no, everything is backwards. So yeah, it is a little bit different. And I think moving to left tackle is a little different thing because of how important it is for a right-handed quarterback's blind side and the pass rushers that you face as a result of that. But for a guy like Brian O'Neill, who's been as successful as he has, and now in the league, I think heading into year 8, to say, no, this is really a lot harder than people make it out to be, it was a pretty interesting moment, given the fact that he's not somebody that's going to be rattled by a ton of things. He's seen a lot of football and played a lot of football in the NFL. So for him to be like, hey, this is not something that everybody tries, I thought was awfully interesting. And yes, it is another data point of why what Donovan Jackson did at Ohio State probably actually helped people that are in NFL buildings that know this stuff way better than we do kind of sit up and say, he did that and pulled it off and they won a national title. That's awfully impressive.
Yeah. Emily, I imagine yours has to do with a certain reality TV show.
No, I am not a Love is Blind watcher. So
I'm not either, just for the record.
I'm not either, but I thought you were the one who pointed this out months ago whenever it happened. I remember you put in the Slack channel, you were like, hey.
I might have, just because I'm online far more than I need to be, but I didn't watch it. Yes, but I thought Josh Metellus's little tidbits about his off season. We learned that he picked up some new hobbies, though he's saving those for his Tell Us with Metellus segments this fall. He did tease online on Twitter or X.
It's Twitter. Just call it Twitter.
It's Twitter. It's baking. So I'm putting out their wedding cakes. I feel like that would be a really interesting one for him to be baking. But yeah, we had that. The hobbies.
Wouldn't he want to come out if it was wedding cakes? Wouldn't he want to come out and say that now? I mean, it's getting to be wedding season. I don't know that he would want to be working that much, but there's money to be made here.
Maybe he's still honing his craft. It's also just a hobby. We don't know he's trying to make money off of it.
I don't know. I mean,
his wife just had a baby. He could just be feeding the cake to his wife, who deserves it.
There you go.
But the baking was on there. He said he'd been to a lot of Timberwolves games and apparently was trash talking Luka Doncic in this last series that I think potentially concludes tonight.
He said Luka just ended up on his lap too at one point.
Right.
I didn't see that on TV.
I didn't see that either. And then the third and final one that we heard was about the Love is Blind appearance, which sounds like the team asked him to do. So again, if you're asking a guy to do that, how does that factor into his pay as well? I would be like, you're asking me to do reality TV. He clearly was excited to do it, but that's another negotiation tactic, I think, for sure.
Well, I mean, you think Tell Us with Metellus is obviously the successor to 96 Questions with Brian Robinson. And Brian Robinson was another one of those guys that I remember when they paid him, I think it was in the middle of 2013 that they gave him a new deal, or it was somewhere around there that they gave him a new contract. And it was a little bit of okay, this is kind of interesting. I mean, because he was, a nice player and somebody that had been successful, but you're not sitting there saying, hey, this is this dominant pass rusher. I mean, he was obviously number 2 to Jared Allen at the time, but they had a lot of respect for him, both as a contributor and just as a leader in that locker room. And it's not the end of the world. Obviously, when players leave, teams find new players to do these kinds of things for content for their websites. But I do think it is a window into, a player that they see as a representative of this team, a player that can, connect with multiple teammates and be entertaining and, do that in a way that's enjoyable and isn't a distraction or isn't something that makes guys feel like, he's coming around with a camera again. I mean, I think I'm not sure how much you quantify it, but I think there's a little bit of, okay, this just gives you a little window into how this team feels about this type of player if they're going to put him out front as often as they do with Metellus or they did with Brian Robinson back in the day.
Yeah, I remember talking to Brian last fall about Josh because we were doing a story on Josh's rise as kind of the voice of this defense or a voice of this defense. And Brian had just said an underrated part of all this is people don't realize is that a lot of people could go around and do this with a camera. But to your point, Ben, a lot of people get viewed as just a class clown, just a guy who's wasting everybody's time, a guy who, well, why are you doing this when you should be working on your craft, get better kind of thing. It's almost like Cam Bynum dancing where like that wasn't a threat to people because everyone knew this guy's grinding. This guy's working as hard as he possibly can. We know he's not taking away from his job. Same with Josh, where he's just all about football all the time to the point he told a story about when he was at Disneyland with his family. He was grinding tape on JJ McCarthy and the quarterbacks last spring because he's wondering, who are we going to take? I need to know who's going to be the quarterback. And I mean, that's the kind of guy that can galvanize locker rooms. And yeah, that matters to a front office and a coaching staff that preaches culture, preaches collaboration in the locker room environment, that they get rated by the NFLPA and by their own players so highly because of guys like Josh.
Yeah, I mean, a guy, too, that I remember when he got that contract, Harrison Smith was one of the guys saying he knows his defense well enough that he could come out and teach it. I mean, there's a level of trust with his football acumen and his detailed knowledge of what they're doing that I don't think anybody gets terribly worried about, how is he allocating his time. So, and I think Brian Robinson was very much the same way. Those are not players that coaches spend a ton of time losing sleep over at night. It's, this guy's doing the things that he should be doing. You can kind of let him kind of go do his own thing because you know that everything will be taken care of. And certainly for coaches, I think that those are the types of players they look at and say, it's nice to have somebody that I can kind of exhale and not have to worry about too much.
Yeah.
Ben, did you have a favorite moment or anecdote or tidbit that we haven't discussed yet from yesterday?
Well, you mentioned Metellus and McCarthy. I had forgotten about the fact that when McCarthy was on a recruiting visit to Michigan, Metellus was a senior there. I think would have been 2018, 2019 or so that McCarthy would have been checking out Michigan to go there. And Metellus said that's where he first met him, was on a recruiting visit towards the end of that season. And he said, JJ was very similar then in terms of the personality to what we see now. And, that the energy he had, I think was something that, Metellus talked about being pretty, he used the word special yesterday. I mean, and again, I think a lot of these things, it's hard to quantify. A lot of these things are vibes based, but I do think is interesting to hear how players are already talking about him. And Brian O'Neill said about McCarthy, you could tell he wants it really bad. I mean, he's a guy that his preparation is not normal in the sense that he's just like, I'm going to come in and do the little bit that I need to do. It's, I want to know everything about everything that I possibly can, and I'm not going to leave any stones unturned. So in that level of thoroughness, I think has already stuck out to players, and that's a really good way to kind of win people to your cause if they see that kind of work and you match it with the level of energy. I remember Kevin O'Connell talking about this with quarterbacks when they were going through the evaluation process. They wanted to go, they went to the sandwich shop at Ann Arbor, and they did this with a lot of players because they want to see how does he treat, the people that nobody knows their name and nobody knows, they're not quote unquote important people in the sense that they have a lot of status. So there's somebody that everybody kind of shows out for because they're trying to impress. O'Connell said that matters because quarterbacks, I think he talked about this, the quarterbacks, when they walk into a room, they change buildings. They are the types of people that elevate the mood, elevate the the standing of everybody around because we have our guy. So that level of a quarterback as kind of an avatar, so to speak, a figurehead for the entire organization, that matters to O'Connell. And I think that matters to JJ McCarthy too. I think that's one of the reasons they feel as good about him as they do, because he understands that. I can remember last summer when he was getting third team reps. I know the idea that he was QB3 is we don't want to designate that, and maybe it wasn't officially that because obviously he was moving around the depth chart and whatever, but he was not the starter. And I remember a lot of, I think would ask for interviews sometimes, and there was like hey, yeah, it's not that he doesn't want to do it. He's also aware of the fact that if he's out here talking a lot, it is going to look different than it would if he's the starter and he's supposed to be talking. I mean, I think everybody would have said, hey, wait a minute, this guy isn't the starter. He's a rookie. Why are we hearing from him so much? So there was a little bit of, I'm going to pull myself back and be in the background a little more because I'm not the guy yet. And I think about Shedeur Sanders a little bit in Cleveland, where he comes in as a day 3 draft pick and he's going to have all of this attention around them. How many veterans in that locker room are going to say, why are we spending so much time hearing about this guy and all of these cameras are here and all of these kinds of things? Players notice that. And JJ McCarthy knew that players noticed that. So that level of just kind of nuance I thought was interesting to hear Metellus talk about that. And it just kind of takes me back to some of the things we've heard about McCarthy relative to that role as face of the franchise that quarterbacks are over the last year.
We could probably do a whole other 45 minutes on Shedeur Sanders, but we don't need to. It's not our beat. It's not our team. We won't go there.
I think if you flipped on your TV last weekend, you got all the Shedeur Sanders content you could possibly want. So we don't need to give you a lot more of that.
No.
Good luck, Kevin Stefanski. Good luck. Good luck.
The last thing I'll throw out there that we haven't talked about is we did hear about this kind of new mantra that the Vikings have for their offseason that came from a Jonathan Grenard tweet, actually 2 tweets I found when I went scrolling back to look for it. He tweeted out the phrase "more is required" after their Lions loss. It was like a couple days after they lost the regular season finale. And then again, the morning after, so it would have been during locker cleanout following the Rams playoff loss. And that has morphed. Someone in the Vikings building decided to put it on shirts that the players found when they got into their lockers for the beginning of offseason program. We heard from Brian O'Neill. We haven't seen the shirts yet. I don't know if they're actually working out in them or if they're just kind of like, I mean, they get a bunch of merch when they come into the building each season, I'm sure. So, but yeah, I think that sentiment, right, is interesting from like a couple angles. One, like you're going into the 4th year under this current regime, and like 4th year, I feel like, is when you need to start stacking the building blocks and not just laying out the foundation of whatever you're building with them. And so that there's that angle. There's obviously, hey, they were a 14-win team last season, but still couldn't do any better than they did that first season that O'Connell was at the helm. They're now 0-2 in that wild card round. So there's like I think it's a good, if maybe a little cliche, like mantra for them to have going into this season.
Oh, and Ben, they're just stating the obvious of, what the messages send when you're signing Ryan Kelly, when you're signing Jonathan Allen, when you're signing Hargrave, when you're signing all these veteran starters and guys to aggressively attack your weaknesses on your roster. It's telling everybody that, hey, what we just did was not good enough.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think you bring up Ryan Kelly, and that one, we haven't probably talked about it in this sense very much, but Garrett Bradbury was a guy that they drafted, that they re-signed when Kevin O'Connell got here. And some of that was, okay, the center market's not great. We don't have a ton of cap room. He's good enough. He's well-liked. He's smart. He's somebody that can help a young center. And I kind of thought if Garrett Bradbury was going to stay, his knowledge in the offense, the time he has spent here, makes him a better resource for JJ McCarthy. Therefore, they fix the guards next to him and gamble on it. They said, no, that's all great, but we need something better here. We want a different body type. We want a different level of physicality at this position. We are going to move on, even if it's for 1 year with an older center, and then you develop somebody else. You get Michael Jorgens ready, or you do whatever you're going to do. That probably would be it at this point with Fries and Jackson on either side. But even that type of a move was, we are not satisfied anymore with sitting on our laurels because they have the cap money to do things like this. And we've seen this with them. I mean, they go win 13 games in 2022, and it was still, nope, defense wasn't good enough. Let's fire our defensive coordinator.
Yep.
Let's get rid of some of these veterans that we don't think are going to be worth what we're paying them moving forward. And that some of that was a roster reset at that point. But they have made moves where this sort of, nice guy vibe that everybody talks about with them, when it comes down to it, and they're not feeling good enough about who's doing their job a certain way, they have not been shy about saying, nope, cut, we're moving on. Lewis Seen, Andrew Booth, Caleb Evans, a lot of those names, they have not been afraid of saying, no matter what relationships we have, no matter how we feel about you as a person, we're moving on because the football hasn't been good enough. I mean, Kirk Cousins is probably an example of this too. They have not been shy about it, and this is probably another example of where that a mantra like that plays out in the way they do their business.
Yeah, regarding Harrison Smith coming back along these lines, Brian O'Neill had said, well, obviously he thinks there's a chance.
Yeah.
Otherwise he wouldn't come back. And then Brian said, of course, I think there's a chance. So they're saying there's a chance around JJ McCarthy and this veteran team taking in a young quarterback and really putting all their faith in Harrison Smith's year 14, really riding on how JJ McCarthy does.
Speaking of you're saying there's a chance. Do you think that Emily could tell us what movie that meme is from?
She's got to know. She's
sitting here trying to think about it. I don't know.
Oh no!
On the tip of her tongue.
Oh no!
We're talking about there's a chance.
You're telling me there's a chance.
Jim Carrey.
Oh yes, I do. Sorry, I was about to swear on the podcast, which I
We have not had the E rating yet.
No. Oh my God.
What about, have you heard the most annoying sound in the world? That's from the same movie.
Our pets' heads are falling off.
So you're telling me there's a chance? I feel like this is gonna really show my age. I feel like I probably know it from the fact that it's been memed and not the movie. Because it rings a bell, but unfortunately I don't know that in this moment on camera. I know. First Randall McDaniel last week. Now this.
It's Dumb and Dumber.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I've never seen it.
It's
sorry. I don't feel bad about not seeing that one. There's
a certain stupid comedy mid-90s thing. It's around the time, it's actually a little before the sort of Adam Sandler trilogy of that era, but it's along those lines. Jim Carrey and Jeff Bridges and it's very stupid, but people of a certain age have seen it many, many times. So that meme pops up constantly, and it's when he's asking her if there's a chance of us getting together. This woman that he likes, and she said, "I would say it's about 1,000,000 to 1." And he goes, "So you're telling me there's a chance? That's all I needed." And just no, I'm not really saying that, but that's where it comes from.
Well, I'll add watching Dumb and Dumber to my homework. I guess
it could be low on the list.
It doesn't need to be at the top, but
I think it's points that I recognized to a degree. But yeah,
you knew the memes.
Partial point.
You're perpetually online, so you knew the memes.
Yeah. Yes, as we mentioned earlier, the only reason I knew about the Love is Blind is not because I watched it, but because I am online.
We're helping you learn the source material behind the memes.
Yes, no, this is good. I teach you the memes. You say, "Oh, well, that's where that meme came from," and will be a good partnership for the three of us.
We're sharing knowledge. Iron sharpens iron here. We're all helping each other out.
You can read about everything that we've talked about, minus Dumb and Dumber, and my lack of familiarity with it, online at thestartribune.com. Ben wrote about JJ McCarthy yesterday. Andrew wrapped up some of the Harrison Smith stuff, Brian O'Neill's comments, also Randy Moss's son coming and working out with the Vikings in a couple weeks. And then I have a story about that "more is required" phrase coming out later. So you can read all of that on thestartribune.com. I will go read up again on Randall McDaniel and watch Dumb and Dumber. And we will talk to you on the podcast again soon.
More is required, Emily.